Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Aisyah Juliani with student ID 25 30 10 30 31. I'm from class 1A of English Education Department. In this video, I will tell you about my understanding of useful phrases. The first material is describing people, things, and places. The function of this material is to provide detailed, vivid description using adjective, sensory details, and structured information. It can also enrich vocabulary, improve observational skills, and enhance descriptive writing and speaking. There are some useful phrases that you can use, and I will give some example too. For example, for describing people, you can use he or she is about. You can use these useful phrases to tell someone height or age. For example, he is about 22 years old. The next is he or she has. You can use these useful phrases to tell someone appearance. For example, he has blonde hair. The next is the phrases you can use for describing things. For example, it is made of. You can use these useful phrases to tell what the thing made of. For example, it is made of metal. And the next is it is used for. You can use these useful phrases to tell something used for. For example, it is used for taking pictures. The next is to describing places. Useful phrases you can use is it is located in. You can use these useful phrases to tell where the place is. For example, it is located in the city center. And the next is it is known for. You can use these useful phrases to tell what's the place popular of. For example, it is known for its peaceful atmosphere. Next material is reporting something. The function of this material is to convey information accurately from news, event, personal experiences, or academic sources. It practices reported speech, summarizing, and formal or informal reporting styles. You can use some useful phrases, and I will give some examples too. First, for news reporting, you can use according to the news, blah blah blah. You can use this to tell if something happened in the news you have watched. For example, according to the news, there was an earthquake in Australia. And then the next is witnesses said. You can use these usual phrases to tell what the witnesses said in the news. For example, witnesses said the flood are destroying 3 houses. The second is for event reporting. You can use useful phrases like the event began with. You can use these useful phrases to tell how the event went. So, for the example, the event began with singing national anthem. The next is everyone agreed, blah blah blah. You can use these useful phrases to tell what everyone agreed on for the event. For example, everyone agreed on cancel the festival. And then the next is personal reporting. You can use useful phrases like she said blah 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 to tell what your friend or what your family said. For example, she said she couldn't come to class. And then the next is, she told me blah blah blah. You can use these useful phrases to tell what did your friend said again, because it's personal reporting. So for example, she told me she really liked the movie. The next is for academic reporting. For example, the researchers found that blah blah blah. You can use these useful phrases to tell what's the data from the researcher. For example, the researcher found that reading improved critical thinking. And then the writer point out that blah blah blah. You can use these useful phrases to tell what's the writer point out in the academic sources, such as journalism or something like that. For example, the written point out that drinking sugar can increase diabetic disease. And the next is telling past event. This material functions as And the next is telling past event. This material has a function to recount personal, factual, or imaginative and past experiences in a clear, chronological manner. It reinforces past tense usage. Sequencing kills and narrative coherence. You can use some useful phrases such as for the personal, last weekend I went to. You can use these useful phrases to describe or tell people what have you been doing last week or last weekend. The next material is telling past event. This material functions as recount personal, factual, or imaginative past experiences in a clear, chronological manner. It reinforces past tense usage, sequencing, skills, and narrative coherence. There are a few useful phrases you can use. For the personal is, last weekend I went to. You can use these useful phrases for where have you been last weekend, yesterday, or last year. For example, last December, I went to Yogyakarta with my family. The next is, to my surprise. You can use these useful phrases to tell what surprises you last time or in the last event. For example, to my surprise, they bought me dim sum. The next is for factual. You can use useful phrases such as during the event, blah blah blah. You can use these useful phrases to tell what's happening in the event. For example, during the event, people cried because the story is so sad. The next is, as a result, blah blah blah. You can use these useful phrases to tell what's happening in the end. For example, as a result, they have to close the gate. The next is an imaginative experience. In my dream, blah blah blah. You can use these useful phrases to tell what's happening in your dream. For example, in my dream, I traveled to Kyoto. The next is, I woke up and realized blah blah blah. You can use these useful phrases to tell what's happening after you open your eyes or you wake up in the imaginative past experience. For example, I woke up and realized that I lay on a flower field. The next material is starting procedures. The function of this material is to explain how to do something step by step, using clear instructions and logical sequencing. It teaches imperative language organization and practical communication for daily tasks. So it based on how to make or the tutorial to make something. For example, the first thing you have to do is to tell the opening. For example, today I'm going to tell you how to make blah blah blah. You can use these useful phrases to tell what are you going to make. For example, today I'm going to tell you how to make a cup of tea. And then, after you do the opening, you do the listening materials. For example, you can use you'll need blah blah blah. For example, you'll need a cup, a tea bag, hot water, and sugar. You can use that useful phrases to tell the tools or the ingredients you have to prepare before you make something. The next is the steps. First, blah blah blah. Next, blah blah blah. And then, blah blah blah. You can use these useful phrases to tell the instruction. What's the first thing you have to do, the second thing, the third thing, and the highlight of making something. For example, first, don't forget to boil some water. The next, put the tea bag in the cup. Blah 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 blah. And also, for the tips or the reminder, you can use don't forget to or don't forget to let the tea steep for 3 minutes. And don't forget to say the closing. And that's how you blah 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 blah. You can tell and that's how you make a cup of simple tea. The next material is storytelling. Storytelling functions to entertain, share personal or cultural experiences, and convey moral lessons through structured narratives. It enhances speaking fluency, creativity, and ability to organize events chronologically. There are some useful phrases you can use. For example, for introduction, you can say, today I'm going to tell a funny personal story entitled, for example, today I'm going to tell you a funny story entitled, the day I wore 2 different shoes. You can use the entitled for your story. The next is to sequencing. It all started when blah blah blah. You can use these useful phrases to tell what's happening at the start. For example, it all started when I woke up late because my alarm didn't ring. And then the next is climax. Suddenly, something unexpected happened. For example, suddenly, my friends burst into laughter. You can say what's happening or what surprises you in this climax text. And then reflection. The lesson I learned is blah blah blah. For example, the lesson I learned is to always double check everything, especially your shoes. You can use this reflection as what have you learned or what have you take from the event that happened to you or in the story. and then don't forget to do the closing, for example. And that is my story. Thank you for listening. You can use these usual phrases to tell thank you to the audience for listening your story. The next is telling important issues and giving arguments. The function of this material is to express opinions, persuade others, and engage in critical thinking about social, environmental, or educational issues. It develops logical reasoning, respectful debate, and structured argumentation. For example, in useful phrases, you can use in my opinion. For example, in my opinion, social media has both positive and negative effects. You can tell your opinion about something in these useful phrases. And then, after expressing our opinions, you can also giving the reason. The main reason is that blah blah blah. For example, the main reason is that it allows students to study anywhere for the positive effects. You can give the reason of your arguments in the first place. And then after that, you can also do agreeing or disagreeing. For example, I completely agree with you, or I see your point, but, for example, the text is, I completely agree with your opinion about recycling. And I see your point, but I think this needs to be studied more. And then, presenting arguments. Some people argue that blah blah blah, but blah blah blah. For example, some people argue that online games are a waste of time, but they can improve problem-solving skills. So, for this representing counter-arguments, you have to prepare the counter-arguments. So you have to add your data first, then you have to add the solution of your data. And that's all from me. I think that's enough. Thank you for listening. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.